In the shadowed heart of Madrid, where candlelight flickered against gilded walls, a queen's anguished cries pierced the silence of 1661. Was this the birth of a king destined to rule, or a harbinger of a dynasty's doom? The child she bore was no ordinary heir, but a fragile, malformed creature, his silence more chilling than any cry. Charles II, swaddled in royal silk, was hailed as Spain's salvation, yet his twisted form whispered a darker truth, a bloodline poisoned by centuries of incestuous ambition. The Habsburgs, Europe's mightiest house, had woven a tapestry of power so tightly knotted it began to fray. Beneath the crown's golden weight lay a secret the court dared not speak. This was no divine king, but a living curse. A tale of pride, decay, and denial awaits, where royal blood became its own undoing. In the autumn of 1661, the royal palace of Madrid stood as a monument to the grandeur of the Spanish Habsburgs, its halls echoing with the weight of an empire that spanned continents. Yet within its opulent chambers, a tragedy was unfolding. Queen Mariana of Austria, niece and wife to King Philip IV, lay in the throes of childbirth, her pain a private agony amid the court's fervent prayers for an heir. The Habsburg dynasty, for centuries the unchallenged sovereigns of Europe, had long guarded their bloodline with a zeal bordering on obsession. Marriages between cousins, uncles, and nieces had woven a lineage so entwined it seemed to defy nature itself. But nature, unyielding, exacted its toll. The child born that day, Charles II, was no robust prince but a frail, silent infant, his body a testament to a dynasty's hubris. Behind the throne, a darker tale unfolds, one of a family that crowned itself divine, yet sowed the seeds of its own ruin. This is the story of a king who was no king, an empire sustained by illusion, and a bloodline that collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. As the courtiers bowed and the incense burned, none could foresee the catastrophe that this birth would herald. In the shadowed annals of the Habsburg dynasty, the pursuit of purity was not merely a tradition, but a sacred creed. By the 17th century, this mighty house, rulers of an empire stretching from the Americas to the Philippines, had crafted a lineage so insular it resembled a labyrinth of mirrors. Each marriage, cousin to cousin, uncle to niece, was a deliberate act to preserve the divine sanctity of their blood. Yet, in their zeal to exclude outsiders, the Habsburgs wove a genetic tapestry that was as fragile as it was intricate. The Spanish and Austrian branches, once distinct, had merged into a single knotted tree, its roots diseased by repetition. Joanna of Austria, an ancestor of the ill-fated child, bore the marks of this practice, a jaw so pronounced it defied function, a tongue so swollen it stifled speech. These were not mere quirks, but harbingers of collapse. The Habsburg jaw, as it came to be known, was no trivial blemish. It was a visible scar of inbreeding, a deformity that rendered chewing a struggle and speech a labor. Beneath the surface lurked graver afflictions, epilepsy, infertility, and minds that flickered like candles in a storm. By the time Queen Mariana of Austria, both niece and wife to King Philip IV, carried her child in 1661, the dynasty's inbreeding coefficient rivaled that of siblings. Their union, a calculated alliance to fortify Habsburg dominance, was instead a crucible for catastrophe. The court, draped in velvet and gold, celebrated the pregnancy as the dawn of a new era, blind to the truth that the bloodline had already begun to poison itself. When Charles II emerged into the candlelit world of Madrid's royal palace, the midwives' silence spoke louder than any proclamation. His head was grotesquely large, his limbs limp, his skin a sickly grey. He did not cry, nor could he nurse. The court physicians, scrambling to quell panic, insisted he was merely frail, that time would mend what birth had marred. Yet the truth was inescapable. Charles was no ordinary infant, but the embodiment of a dynasty's hubris. His body, a fragile vessel of royal ambition, bore the weight of centuries of reckless unions. The nobles bowed, the nurses swaddled him in silk, but their reverence could not mask the dread that lingered in their eyes. This was no prince destined for greatness, but a warning crowned in gold. And yet, the empire demanded a king, and so the masquerade began, a masquerade that would conceal a far greater reckoning to come. The infant Charles II, christened His Catholic Majesty, was draped in the trappings of royalty, yet his frail form mocked the grandeur of his titles. His tongue, too large for his mouth, rendered speech a tortured endeavour. His bones, soft as wax, defied the strength expected of a king. He could not walk until past 5, his steps a shambling parody of grace that made courtiers avert their gaze. His mind, too, was a shadowed realm, slow, unfocused, prone to sudden bursts of violence or vacant stares at flickering candlelight. The palace, a glittering fortress of Habsburg power, became a stage for a grim charade. Nobles clapped, priests prayed, and tutors whispered of divine mystery to cloak what was plainly brain damage. To admit the truth, that their king was a ruin, would be to confess the dynasty's failure. Queen Mariana, Charles's mother and regent, wielded power behind her son's broken silhouette. She signed decrees in his name, her voice the true echo in the throne room, while Charles, propped in golden litters, stared glassily into the void. His survival was no triumph, but a political necessity, a grotesque endurance to sustain an empire teetering on collapse. The court's illusion was meticulous. Portraits painted Charles with chiseled features and confident eyes, erasing the sagging jaw and twitching lips. Banquets were held where he drooled into his goblet, unable to wield a spoon, while musicians played to a king who blinked vacantly into the distance. A French envoy, horrified, wrote of a court pretending their monarch was well, while a dwarf's whispered truth, a kingdom ruled by a corpse, vanished with its speaker by dawn. Yet the lie could not wholly suppress reality. Behind closed doors, Charles's tutors despaired at his inability to read or write with fluency. Loud noises startled him, bright lights pained him. He tore at his robes or chewed furniture corners in inexplicable fits. A boy king trapped in a body that betrayed him at every turn. The empire, vast and sprawling, demanded a ruler, but Charles was no more than a marionette, his strings pulled by a mother desperate to preserve the Habsburg myth. The air grew thick with incense to mask his infections. His linens changed twice daily to hide his indignities. And still, the court pressed forward, planning marriages, whispering of heirs, as if a bloodline so poisoned could yield salvation. The stage was set for a tragedy yet deeper, as the illusion of kingship began to crack under its own weight. As Charles II grew, the Habsburg court clung to a desperate hope that their broken king could sire an heir to preserve the dynasty's faltering legacy. His body, a crumbling edifice of genetic ruin, offered little promise, yet the empire's survival demanded the illusion of continuity. At 17, Charles was wed to Marie-Louise of Orléans, a vibrant French princess whose arrival in Madrid was met with pageantry and dread. Her youth and vitality stood in stark contrast to the king's sagging jaw and trembling limbs. On their wedding night, the royal bedchamber became a theatre of tragedy. Charles, confused and frail, could neither comprehend nor consummate the union. Whispers spoke of his tears, his prayers, or his vacant stare as attendants intervened. No child came, not that night, nor ever. Marie-Louise, trapped in a gilded cage, withered under the weight of her role, her laughter fading until her death at 26, shrouded in rumors of despair or poison. Undeterred, the court sought another bride. Maria Anna of Neuburg, a German noblewoman from a lineage famed for fertility, was chosen to salvage the Habsburg line. Strong-willed and politically astute, she entered a palace where hope was as scarce as truth. Despite rituals and relentless efforts, her marriage mirrored the first, barren, humiliating, and silent. Charles's sterility, a legacy of centuries of inbreeding, was immutable. The court, unwilling to face this reality, turned to superstition. Physicians were cast aside for exorcists who poured holy water over the king's naked form, chanting Latin to expel imagined curses. Potions of ground pearls and Spanish fly were administered, while priests burned herbs beneath his bed, blaming sorcery or Satan for what science could plainly explain. The dynasty's refusal to acknowledge its own poisoned blood condemned Charles to a life of ritualized torment. The palace chapel echoed with ceaseless prayers for a miracle that never came. Foreign suitors, upon meeting Charles, recoiled. One princess fainted, another refused to touch him, fearing contagion. Yet the court persisted, bowing and smiling, as if the crown could defy biology. Charles, now a spectral figure, was paraded before ambassadors, his drooling form dressed in velvet, his vacant eyes a mirror to an empire's decay. The failure to produce an heir was not merely personal, but existential. A crack in the foundation of Habsburg power. As Spain's treasury dwindled and its colonies stirred, the court's obsession with lineage blinded it to the gathering storm. The absence of a successor loomed like a shadow, heralding a war that would soon engulf the continent. By his third decade, Charles II was a living relic of a dynasty in decline, his body a grotesque canvas of Habsburg ambition. His skin, waxy and yellowed, clung to bones that bent under their own weight. His teeth, loosened by decay, fell one by one, leaving him unable to chew. Servants spooned pureed food into a mouth that drooled ceaselessly. Cataracts clouded his eyes, which twitched as if seeking escape from a skull that had never fully formed. Seizures racked his frame, and infections festered in a body that could no longer control its functions. Yet the crown remained, heavy upon a head that trembled beneath its weight. The court, ever complicit, dressed him in velvet robes, combed his thinning hair, and propped him before assemblies, a waxen figure melting under the gaze of a faltering empire. Superstition supplanted reason, as the court saw answers in the divine rather than the biological. Exorcists replaced physicians, stripping Charles naked to douse him in holy water, chanting to banish curses no science could confirm. One priest declared a Moorish sorcerer had hexed the king, a convenient fiction to avoid the truth. Charles was the natural endpoint of a bloodline turned toxic. His bedchamber, thick with incense to mask the stench of decay, became a shrine to denial. Courtiers shielded him from mirrors, fearing his own reflection might shatter the illusion of his divinity. His mind, unraveling, wandered through fog. He mistook strangers for kin, whispered to shadows, and spoke in fragmented Latin, a boy king lost in a dream of kingship. The Spanish Empire, like its monarch, was rotting from within. Famine gnawed at the provinces, taxes bled the people dry, and colonies stirred with rebellion. The court, a battlefield of whispers, fractured into factions, vying for influence over a regent queen who ruled through her son's vacant stare. Religious zealots, seeing Charles's afflictions as divine wrath, infiltrated the palace, preaching exorcisms and penance. Ministers quarreled, nobles schemed, and foreign powers, France and Austria, circled like vultures, sensing the throne's fragility. Charles' will, dictated in his final years, was a contested relic, rewritten by priests and manipulated by envoys. War loomed, inevitable as the king's next breath, yet none dared act while he lingered. The empire clung to its sacred corpse, its rituals a desperate bid to forestall collapse. But the truth, long buried, was clawing its way to the surface, and with it came the promise of a reckoning that would reshape Europe. In the autumn of 1700, Charles II lay beneath heavy velvet sheets in the royal chamber, a skeletal figure shrouded in candlelight and incense. His body, at 38, was a ruin, a heart blackened, lungs drowning in fluid, intestines gangrenous. His blood, once heralded as divine, ran thick as oil, his atrophied frame barely 100 pounds. His eyes, clouded and unseeing, flickered with fragments of a life spent in shadow, muttering broken Latin, names of long-dead sisters, or nonsense born of a mind dissolved into fog. The court, ever vigilant, surrounded him with priests and relics, their prayers a futile chant against the inevitable. Charles was no longer a king, but a symbol of extinction, the final link in a chain forged by centuries of arrogance. His death was not a tragedy, but an exhale, a release from a masquerade that had endured too long. When his breath rasped and ceased, no cry broke the silence. Courtiers bowed, as if rehearsed, their heads lowered not in grief but in resignation. The bells of Madrid tolled for hours, a mournful dirge across a nation bled dry by famine and taxes. The Spanish Habsburgs, rulers of half the known world, ended not in glory, but in a tomb more lavish than their last king deserved. His autopsy, a grim litany of decay, shocked even hardened physicians. Organs rotted, testicles withered, a body collapsed inward like an empire undone. There were no heirs, no sons to mourn him, only a disputed will, manipulated by vultures, French, Austrian, and Spanish, who had long awaited this moment. The War of the Spanish Succession erupted before Charles's body cooled, a conflagration that would engulf Europe for over a decade. France and Austria, each with rival claimants, turned Spain into a chessboard, its sovereignty shattered. The empire's treasury, already hollowed, could not withstand the strain. Colonies rebelled, and borders were redrawn in blood. Hundreds of thousands perished in a conflict born of a dynasty's refusal to heed nature's laws. Charles's bones, sealed in gold beneath the Escorial's marble, became a silent monument to hubris. His reign, nearly 4 decades of illusion, left no victories, no legacy, save a warning. Power, when treated as an heirloom, devours itself. The world moved on, but the scars of that collapse lingered, a testament to a bloodline that crowned its own doom. Yet, in the ashes of that war, a deeper truth stirred, one that would demand reckoning beyond the grave. The tale of Charles II and the Habsburgs' fall is but one thread in the tapestry of history's darker chapters. To explore more stories of power, treachery, and human frailty, subscribe to delve deeper into the shadows of the past, where truth lies buried beneath the weight of crowns and ambition. The annals of history await, each page a mirror to humanity's triumphs and failures. Charles II was no tyrant, no villain, merely a consequence, a man whose broken body bore the sins of a dynasty that deemed itself divine. His life, a grotesque pageant of denial, revealed a truth as old as power itself. When bloodlines are prized above merit, empires crumble under their own weight. The Spanish Habsburgs, in their pursuit of purity, bred not strength, but extinction. Their legacy, a caution carved in bone. Charles's throne, draped in velvet and deceit, was less a seat of rule than a mausoleum for a dynasty's dreams. His death in 1700 marked not just the end of a king, but the unraveling of a myth. That power, unchecked, could defy nature's reckoning. History does not mourn such kings. It dissects them, laying bare the folly of their crowns. In the silence of his tomb, Charles II whispers still, "A dynasty's pride is its own poison, and no amount of gold can gild a truth so grotesque." The past, unyielding, demands we listen,